If you're interested in spirituality, or maybe you've had a spiritual awakening and you're trying to understand how to navigate your path, your career in relation to everything that you've found, then you're going to be really interested in this conversation that I recently had with Zenobia Hong, who is the spiritual guide and works with consciousness, because she recently interviewed me about vocations and careers and how to navigate this, especially in relation to spirituality, spiritual awakenings, as well as moving into this new era, this age of Aquarius. And in this conversation, we explore things like temptation paths, paths that can lead us off track, and how to get back on track. We explore really coming into connection with your calling. We also explore protecting your calling. I start to talk about this idea of these two different types of spiritual career paths that I've seen, one that goes towards liberation and one that goes towards this manifestation. And so if you're someone that is currently navigating your path, maybe you don't know what path to choose at all, or maybe you have started to walk your path, but you're trying to understand how to navigate it, then I hope that you enjoy this conversation and it gives you a lot to think about, to digest, and can help you on your way.
How does one come to know their purpose?
There are some people that are meant for that path of intense like liberation. And then you have people that are like, hey, I had this spiritual awakening, and now I actually need to go and speak to people, guide people, heal people. Typically, for most people, is going to be one where they're doing earthly work in the human world with people. There's a human element to this lifetime. And especially in the spiritual spaces, there can sometimes be a disrespect to that human element because of the pursuit of some sort of transcendent experience or to maintain some transcendent experience throughout your lifetime. And there are parts of you that you do not know about yourself that you need to find in order to bring those forward. And by bringing those forward, then you have a better idea of your self knowledge, and therefore you'll go towards your calling. The fear is the way. Because these parts of you that you don't want to show everybody, don't want to reveal to everybody, are the actual pieces of you that you have to reveal to everybody. By bringing these pieces of you forward, you're actually not only able to walk your calling, but you're also able to impact people at a bigger level. People will get to the end of their lives and they will not pursue their calling, which is something that I'm sort of like wanting to ring the alarm.
Joel, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I want to kickstart this call with just maybe by you starting to share with us what you do, who are you, and where are you from?
Yeah, so my name's Joey Ely. I am a philosopher. And what I end up doing, or what I've come to do, is helping people to understand what their vocation is in life. So, what their calling is, what they're meant to be doing. This often ends up coming through in the sense of a career path. And a lot of people in the world are now sort of waking up to the fact that, hey, I don't have to go to a 9 to 5 job anymore, but what can I do? And how can I pursue a path that feels like it's me, like it's meant for me? And so I
Mhm.
help people to connect into that and find that path and walk those steps so they can start doing it in the world. I'm actually from Australia, and I currently have this online community where I help people to do exactly that by unearthing what is called a career archetype, which is this energetic pattern that resides at the base level of our soul that can tell us more about what we are meant for. So that's sort of a really brief summary of what I do.
Amazing. Yeah. I was enrolled in your class because it was one of those moments where I was having a moment of, just self-doubt. Even this is a very different kind of career that we're seeing emerge, right? This sort of unlinear, unconventional, far away from traditional sort of the 9 to 5 jobs. And we're seeing really like a need for this. And yesterday, while I was preparing my questions and stuff, taking notes, I actually did a little list of all the people I knew and how they felt about their jobs. And so I either put like a red
Mm,
mark to see if they were happy, a green mark for, sorry, a red mark for if they're miserable, a green mark for if they're happy, and like an orange mark if it's like somewhere in between. And
mm,
the this survey came up to basically 50% of the people were not happy at their jobs. And this is just people
mm,
in my life, right? And 50 people are okay with it. They like it. And that's a big number. 50% of people in my life who don't like their jobs yet they stay in it.
Yeah, there's this. Another thing that I found super interesting is that people are actually starting to verbalize it now. So they're no longer sort of holding it in, pushing it down, repressing it. They're instead coming out and starting to say, like, hey, I don't actually like waking up on somebody else's time. I don't actually like waking up and having to rush in the morning. I kind of just want to sit there near the window, take in the sun for like 5 minutes, just get some sunlight in, maybe have a nice tea rather than having to run out the door or quickly open the laptop, log in, and make sure that everyone sees that they're online and that they're working hard. So people are really just starting to say like, hey, I don't want that. And other people as well, to their credit, are starting to express a different way of being in a different life. And so people are seeing that, hey, that's possible. There's a new way of being out in the world that's starting to come forward. What I think is another thing that's super interesting with this sort of new wave is that there are two sort of areas that traditionally have sort of been uh, not allowed to be pursued like vocally, and that's sort of like the creative space and the spiritual space. And so a lot more people are starting to opt into these paths that are sort of spiritually inclined, are creatively inclined, and are starting to actually see different approaches to walking it. It's not like a step by step, here's a degree, then you get the job. It's very different. Like you mentioned, it's non-linear for many people. But just that realization, I think, is incredible. And we're living in a really exciting time because a lot of people are starting to figure out how to do it. And then they're passing that knowledge backwards to other people. And those people are saying, oh, okay, I can kind of navigate that too.
Mhm. And no one said it was easy, right? No one said that this new path, we're paving a new path, literally, that has not existed before, or that's very new, right? So it's not meant to be smooth and easy and this like delusion that like it's all supposed to be so, just rainbows and butterflies.
I get some people sometimes where they'll get into the program and they'll be like, all right, so 30 days and then I'll be making six figures and I'll be very happy and I'll be able to pursue my calling. And I'm just like, not here, not in the way that I've seen it. They are going, especially if you are going to be walking a path that is more aligned and a little bit more has more friction to it relative to what you're used to. Because when you start walking one of these paths, oftentimes a lot of the people in your lives they don't really understand that kind of way of being. They haven't seen that approach work, and so you're not only coming against yourself because you have to start to step into who you really are, but you're also having to come up against parents, friends, peers, and
Mhm.
just even taking your own sort of perception of their judgment and just starting to navigate that. So there's a lot of friction that has to be worked through. There's a lot of what I call these becoming barriers that have to be overcome. So becoming barrier is these particular challenges that you walk as you start to pursue your calling. And so
Yeah.
you've got to pursue your calling in the face of a lot of adversity, or you start to say, oh, okay, it's actually moving in the right direction for me.
Hmm. You obviously have went through it yourself and you're somebody who has embodied your own career archetype. And now, it's very rare to come across somebody and, when you ask somebody what they do to say, "Oh, I'm a philosopher." You just don't hear that
Yeah.
anymore. It seems like a thing of the past, right? The Renaissance times or something like that. But um how did you get to the point that you are now? How did you get to a point where your career, what you do is a philosopher? I find that fascinating.
So I've always, and this is one of the interesting things that I've found just with working with so many people, that typically there are hints and clues as to what you're meant to be doing throughout your life, and that's scattered around, and a lot of figuring that out does require this self-gathering of this knowledge. In terms of myself, like I was always interested in the bigger questions. I was always like thinking about like what is the meaning of this? Do we have to live like this? What are alternative ways to having a meaningful existence? Is there meaning? Right? I was just always sort of circling these different questions, but I'd never identified as somebody that had wanted to pursue these types of questions. And so it was always there. I just didn't know it. It's like your nose, like you can't see your nose, but then you look at your nose and then suddenly it's like, oh, there's my nose. So that was sort of going on for me throughout my entire life. But the sort of the tipping point was there was two sort of tipping points. The first one was walking across and getting my psychology degree in university and walking across the stage and receiving it and walking off and just thinking to myself, this isn't really what I wanted to be doing. This isn't my track. I don't want to be moving in this direction. So that was the first tipping point. And the second one was I ended up finding myself in this claims assessor role doing insurance, helping with this warranty program. And going and showing up to work, I just thought, this sucks. I do not want to be here. How can I do something that is more fulfilling? And my issue was that I had so many different options in my mind of different things to potentially pursue. I couldn't choose one. So I didn't know how to move in that direction in the first place, which actually ended up leading me down this sort of rabbit hole of trying to figure out this essential problem of what am I meant to be doing with my life? If I'm going to be working in a career or a vocation for 30, 40, life's getting longer, 50, 60 years, I want to be doing something that feels good, that feels right, that helps other people. And so I started to dissect, in a way, how to approach meaningful existence in the context of the modern era. And so I started going through like different theories. I looked at Venn diagrams, personality tests, Reddit rabbit holes, all these different books. I went deep on Carl Jung, who was, as you can see, inspired a lot of the work with the archetypes. And I tried to figure out what am I meant to be doing. And through that process, I actually started to surface a lot of this internal knowledge into my awareness. And it was funny. I was actually speaking to my girlfriend. This was over half a decade ago, and we were just having a conversation. And she often would like throw out different names of different things that I could potentially do, and nothing surfaced. Like nothing hit. Nothing was like, oh, that's the thing I'm meant to be doing. And then one day she was like, oh, I think you're a philosopher, and I was like, shit, like that might be the thing. That might be the thing. And I remember it just hit me so deeply that I went through this oh moment, this aha moment, this looking at all the information that I'd collected and started to notice that there was just a singular like point. And that's when I started to understand, oh, that's my thing. That's what I am. That's who I am at the core when it comes to my vocation. And ever since then, I started to try to understand that and try to embody that. But it was really that moment of coming to awareness through that somebody else like speaking it to me, and then it just hit for some reason, and that's how I arrived at philosopher. I didn't know how a philosopher works in the modern world. I had absolutely no idea. I actually went through my own crisis after that, which was how do I actually walk this path in the modern world? Because I don't want to go and be a professor. I definitely know I don't want to go into the university setting. I also don't want to go and do some consulting, which a lot of people that pursue and study philosophy do. They'll go and do like business consulting. And that just gave me like all the wrong kind of feelings. And so I started to have to try to figure out how to pursue philosophy in the way that felt correct for me. And I saw a lot of people at the time doing different online businesses, and I'm like, that seems like closer. So I started to pursue that route, and thankfully it worked out.
That's amazing. I mean, that story in itself is so inspiring because that really you kind of set the, I mean, this is the work that you do, I guess. You're setting the not the path, but you're giving guidance to how people could find their own calling and to pursue that, right? And I mean, it takes one to show the others, right? And I feel like that's what you've done with this course. And I have to say, like, your course is so thorough. I mean, this is not just like an easy sort of, we dive deep and you're not messing around. Like you mean business. And
Yeah.
so I was very impressed because I'm still in the middle of it and I can't wait to finish it. But just from the half of the modules that I've done, it's I already see the impact. You're not necessarily like just sugarcoating things. You're getting to the root of things. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I loved that you talked about was the temptation paths. And
Mm.
I think everybody, maybe most people fall into a temptation path. Can you elaborate a little more on what a temptation path is and how someone could fall into one and how someone could fall out of it?
Mm. So the way that I probably describe it is that you have your calling. and this is the direction that you're meant to go in your vocation. And once you know what your calling is and you've defined it and you truly like have internalized it, then any other path becomes a path that isn't meant for you. And so when you don't or you're not connected into your calling, there are all these different paths that look like options that aren't actually options. They just present as options because you're not connected in, because of for many different reasons, conditioning, whether you're brought up, your own personal, you haven't confronted yourself in that way yet in order to actually find that calling. And so there are all these different paths out there that can seduce you to go down pathways to become somebody that you're not actually meant to become. And this can be for all these different sorts of human desires. But when I talk about your vocation, what I'm really pointing at is your soul's desire when it comes to your work in this world and during this lifetime. And so when you're connected into your soul's desire, then you're able to properly pursue your path. But if you're not connected into it, then there are all these other different paths. So some examples of different temptation paths that popping up are things like, oh, I'm going to pursue this because of status. I'm going to pursue this because of money. I'm going to pursue this because my parents think it's great. I'm going to pursue this because there's kind of an easy pathway, or there's a like someone's laid out the groundwork of how to go about it. So, for example, if a parent has like a family business and there's like an easy transition into it, so it's frictionless. And so there are all these different paths that we have to be aware of that aren't actually meant for us. And what I've noticed is that the main reason people walk down temptation paths is simply because they're not connected into themselves, which is why so much of the course that you're going through requires someone to collect that self-knowledge so that you can become more aware of these different temptation paths. Now, many people are already aware of some of the temptation paths in their life. Maybe they're already on the temptation path and that they know it, but it's really like identifying it and then getting rid of it so that you can properly connect it to your calling. So it's two main ones. The first one is the one that sort of hits sort of base level needs like security, safety, and that kind of thing. And the other one is when it kind of fits. This is a real danger zone where it kind of fits the thing that you're meant to be doing, but it's not the actual thing itself. So there's like components of the path in it, but doesn't have everything. So an example might be somebody that has a calling that is meant to be creative, but then they end up in graphic design and they're not actually meant for graphic design. So there's a component of creativity, but they're not meant to be a graphic designer. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's more artistic, or just allows for more artistic expression. So that's probably how I'd describe it.
When you're caught in one of them, I've been caught in many throughout my 20s. I tried
Me
so
too.
many jobs,
Me
so
too.
many careers, and for some I even had to go back to school for. And that's really not ideal for a person like me because I just don't like school, period. So I had to go back to school several times to try these different careers. And um, it pulls you in, and that's why it's called a temptation path because it's tempting. You have an idea of what it's going to be. So it's like expectations versus reality, essentially. And you get to the reality part and you're like, oh gosh, what have I done? Did I just lose like 4 years? Um,
Mm,
but no, I don't think you lose. I don't think you lose 4 years, right? I mean, I
mm,
remember in one of your videos you said that these all are part of your experience, and it's going to come in useful for the actual path that you're supposed to be on. It's nothing is lost, right?
mm. Yeah, so there are definitely different components that you can take along with you for the ride. And if you've gone through particular experiences, they will be useful later on. And so nothing is ever lost or wasted in that way. However, it is my sort of view that if like because you'll get these different like hints and clues and things like you mentioned, there'll be like a subtle thing popping up. It's like, hey, you're not meant to be here. Hey, you're meant to be somewhere else. You kind of know this.
Hmm.
And then obviously if you're in a path that's really like painful, that gets really, really loud and really, really obvious. And sometimes it's actually better to be in a path that's really, really painful because it pushes you to shift.
Hmm.
Whereas these kind of really subtle signs cause people to not shift and they end up staying in these paths for very long periods of time. Um, but when it comes to not being aware of it, what that can often mean is that people will get to the end of their lives and they wouldn't have pursued their calling, which is something that I'm sort of like wanting to ring the alarm bells on and be like,
Hmm.
hey, those little thoughts, like be aware of them.
You said in one of your Instagram posts, spiritual awakenings will disrupt your career path when it's not the one, asking you to believe what you witnessed by having the courage to leave. Yeah, can you speak on that? Did you have a spiritual awakening as well?
Yeah, so I definitely did. So I had it personally in terms of my own experience, and that happened quite a long time ago. I was actually in California, and I was doing a friend introduced me to some psychedelic stuff, and he got me going on that, and I was like, this is something else that I'd never experienced.
Hmm.
And one of the interesting things there was I'd grown up in a religious background early on, and then I left religion and went sort of down an atheistic path where it was very there is no God, there is nothing, it's just after we die, that's the end and that's it. That was sort of my take very early on in my 20s. And I was introduced, like I mentioned, to a friend who introduced me to psychedelics. And that was when I think that was the first time I was like, oh, okay, what is going on here? I am not aware of reality as in the way that I've defined it in my mind is
Hmm.
not how it actually exists. And that obviously caused a lot of different questioning. So it was more of a crisis, the way that I experienced it. It was just chaos going off
Mm.
everywhere. So that was sort of like the first point of it. And then the second point of it was I ended up doing some work with a mystic, and she introduced me to certain like how to access that space in a way that was more sort of like deliberate and conscious. And that was sort of like the same domain. And so I saw like this interaction between two, one that sort of just arrived to me through a person, and another one where somebody did work with me that I was actually able to connect with that stuff. But I kept that very, very private. I kept that to myself and didn't really talk about that in relation to vocations. It wasn't until I started talking uh, about just paths and sort of the way in which paths can navigate, because I saw it was quite different from the way that it was described. And so I started to share that. And then I started to basically bring in people that had gone through different spiritual awakenings. And they started to tell me, like, hey, I went through a spiritual awakening. I can no longer do my job. What is going on here? And it would be like 2 years past, and they'd been like sort of like going through the motions, and it just wasn't working. And I just had so many people that had gone through their own personal spiritual awakening that I just started to say, okay, there's something like really here, and it's not just me. And I need to start speaking on how people can navigate this. And so that's why I started talking about it and why I started sharing information on how people navigate it. And it's quite different. There are some common themes. Like one common theme is like the intensity of how bad the work is like really in their face. It's like it's not just pain. It's not just like slightly painful anymore. It's like really painful, and
Mhm.
it just like comes right to the forefront. Another aspect was that it's not just their vocation. Typically, their career comes last, and it's like health gets hit, relationships get hit, their whole like worldview and the point they see the world gets hit, and they have to like completely reorientate how they see themselves and their place in the world. And then once they start to get like a little bit of stability, then it's like, okay, now I can start looking at this career thing or like earning money. So that was another thing that would often show up. There's others, but yeah, so that's why I started to talk about it more because I saw a lot of people that were suffering through it, and there wasn't any sort of clear map as to how to navigate it.
Mhm. And I don't think it's a coincidence that that this course that your channel and your business has started at the time that it has started, because we are seeing a lot more spiritual awakenings in the world, and there's this thing called the Age of Aquarius. We're entering like this new age, sort of, called the Age of Aquarius, and this is all about creating a new reality. And so the old paradigm, it seems like it's sort of not dismantling, but a lot of people are starting to see new possibilities, new ways of living, of working, and that it doesn't have to feel like you're in a prison, because that's how I
Mm,
felt for most of my jobs. I felt like I was in a prison. The cubicle would feel like a prison. And so in terms of like the people that you're working with, is it mostly people who are spiritually inclined or not necessarily? It can also be people who are just unhappy at their jobs and feeling unfulfilled, and they just want to do work for something that resonates with their skills, with their joy. Um, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, 2 points. Like, I just had to like talk about the Age of Aquarius, which was super fascinating. And I'm interested that you brought that up. Because I mean, with the sign of Aquarius and being related to the fringes, being related to, so one of the ways I like to think about Aquarius is like you have like the castle, and then you have the person that goes outside the castle and sort of goes rogue, and then meets all these fringe characters and fringe ideas, and then they find a fringe idea, and then they're like, "Oh, this is super interesting. I'm going to bring it back to the main castle. I'm going to rebuild the castle, restructure the castle." And the problem always is that people within the castle are like, "No, we like it how it is," and they're like, "But
Mm,
this one's better." And there's like this tension going on. So I definitely have seen that with careers, because there's like, hey, this is how it is, and some people are like really trying to make sure that it stays how it is. Like, hey, everyone, come back to the office. We want to return to how it was pre-pandemic. And then you have all these other people that have sort of realized this new way of truth, or a better way, or a better approach, and they want to bring back this stuff. And obviously, I give that example, but I think it applies to people having these like spiritual experiences as well, and they
mm,
want to just like bring these back into the castle. And the people within the castle are like, "Whoa, they never want to take that on."
mm.
So we have that, and then sorry, I've got the other question that you asked just before.
Yeah, is it like the most of the people that you work with, are they more spiritually inclined, or do some people not necessarily have any idea about spirituality and they just want to do a job that's more fulfilling, just change their, I mean, we, between you and I, we both know that, everyone is spiritual, whether they're conscious of it or not, but whether if the people who are you're working with, if they are all spiritually conscious or not necessarily.
Yeah, so in the early days when I started doing this type of work, it was just anyone that was looking for fulfillment. However, now it's typically three kinds of people. Um, The first one is people that are spiritually inclined. The second one is that are creatively inclined. And the third one is people that have, who sometimes identify as like multi-passionate, or they're just interested in many different things.
Mm,
And so those are the kind of three categories. You often get one person that is like all three, and then it's like playing in all three domains. But those are the kinds of people that typically get attracted to this type of work. One thing that I found really interested though has been that some people that are interested in many different things, who have disregarded spirituality and they pushed it aside, they'll get into this kind of work, and I just ask them to just like taste it, just test out some of this type of stuff, and then they start going down the rabbit hole, and then they start getting really interested in the spiritual side of things. However, in the beginning, it was more just like, hey, I just want to be or bring some more of my interests together in my work life.
mhm. How does one become to know their purpose? And how does one come to not only hear the calling, but answer the calling? Because there's a difference, right?
So when you connect into, so the to like zoom out a little bit, as a human, you have like a life purpose. And that life purpose is constructed of all these different domains of your life and all your different experiences. So your relationships, your work, your own personal uh, understanding of yourself, your own personal connection to your soul. You're also your connection to the divine, which is like there is no self, and like that just disappears, and it just with this all. It's very hard to describe. That's just this all thing. So there are all these different facets of your own personal life purpose. And so that's sort of one like way of viewing it. When we're talking about your calling, or the way that, at least the way that I talk about it, is I typically connect it with the vocation. Like, what is your life's work, and what does that look like? Um, but we do have to accept that there are different elements around it as well. The way in which to connect in with your calling is, and this is the way that I've found it to be true with all the people that I work with, is this understanding of self-knowledge. And that's why I will typically harp on about it. Now, that can sound a little bit like, okay, self-knowledge, I kind of know myself, but the sort of approach that sort of strikes me, or like just keeping this concept in mind that can help to explore this concept, is that there are parts of you that you do not know about yourself that you need to find in order to bring those forward And by bringing those forward, then you have a better idea of your self-knowledge, and therefore you'll go towards your calling. And so one of the ways to ground this idea into some like practical exercise, one of the questions I asked in the course is like, what's your favorite movie? And who's your favorite character within that movie? And the reason I ask this is because there's a reason that you resonate with certain things. And if we're thinking about a movie or a favorite character, there is something within that character that is also within you. And so there's a relationship there. And typically the reason you're getting attracted to it is because you're not aware of this. You're not aware of why you're interested in this person. You might be sitting back watching a movie, eating like popcorn or whatever you do when you're watching like Netflix. And you're just like, oh, okay, like that character's going on like a journey, and they're just doing things, and they're super confident, but I'm not confident. The alchemists had this idea that every one way to think about it, because this was a point that Jung brought up, every single trait contains its opposite. So shyness has confidence connected to it. Extroversion has introversion connected to it. So if you are an introvert, it just means that you've nurtured the side of yourself more. And there's this extroverted side to yourself that you haven't nurtured. Now, he would talk about it as like more of like an inferior function. If you've like repressed it down, you push it away so that you're not using it, but it's still in there. And so there are all these different components of yourself and ways in which you identify with yourself that you've said like, hey, this is me. And yet there are all these other facets of like, hey, we also want to be involved in your life. Now, what I've noticed that as people pursue their calling more and more is that these different facets that are hiding need to come forward more and more.
Mm.
And so oftentimes when people are walking like spiritual paths or want to or desire it and they don't even know it, there's some of these pieces of themselves that need to come forward. And that's the friction. That's why Jung would say like, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something like the fear is the way. Because these parts of you that you don't want to show everybody, that you don't want to reveal to everybody, are the actual pieces of you that you have to reveal to everybody. And not only that, is that those pieces they often have like more of a potency to them. They have like a more like this. There's more like a magnetic quality that draws people on in by bringing those pieces of you forward. So by bringing these pieces of yourself forward, you're actually not only able to walk your calling, but you're also able to impact people at a bigger level. And that is hard to bring those pieces forward. And so everyone has their own, right? You might just be like, well, that person's confident and I'm not confident. They've got everything. It's like, no, they've got other things in their own story that they're not doing. But the confidence piece might be yours. And by bringing that forward in yourself or figuring out how to navigate that water by being more seen, you have a new form of potency within your work. Yeah. Does that answer your
Wow.
question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Carl Jung, correct me if I'm wrong, was there something called like the golden shadow? Because everybody knows about the shadow work, but the golden shadow, I think he calls it like very similar to what you said. It's when you see something, a quality in somebody else that you admire. Usually it's something that's already within you. And so you could develop that aspect within yourself. And so he called it the golden shadow because it's a shadow, but it's not a bad one. It's like it's one of the good ones.
Yeah, I mean, the deeper in that you dive in on your own personal, these parts of you that you don't know, and you start bringing them forward, you just start to notice that you interact with reality differently, and therefore your reality starts to change because of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know that it's always hard for people to bring those parts of themselves forward, but I'm typically like pleading with them to bring that part forward because your entire life changes.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that in my life too. There's, for people who are very deeply on the path, on the spiritual path, right? On the spiritual journey and the initiatic path and all that. There's there's like a two layers, I find. There's like the layer of your true self, right? Coming back to this like true nature, this oneness that you're part of, or that you are simply. And and then there's the very human part that I feel like we can't ignore that, because we are human. I mean, we're human beings, we're being human, but there's still the very human aspect of us. We're not just going to disappear. We're not going to, our body's not just going to evaporate. It's still there. And there's memories that are stored in our body, in our brains. And so we have
Mm,
to deal with the human aspect. And this is so interesting because this is what basically I've been trying to do is the spiritual aspect is very important, but also the human aspect is very important. And I'm talking about psychology, psyche, and, personality tests and all those things. It's very important. And so for me, know thyself has many layers to that. There's a know thyself in terms of the philosophical and also psychological and all of these ways that you teach. And then there's also the know thyself on the spiritual level, which is your true self. But
mm,
I think there's like this might sound controversial for some spiritual people, but you know, it's a dance. This spiritual and human aspect, it's a dance of life. And not everyone is going to be able to just transcend their humanness, right? There's a lot of people who
mm,
I mean, because that's essentially you're aiming for enlightenment. And to do that, you probably have to become like a monk and give up your life here and go to a temple
mm,
and commit to that, right? It's a long journey to become enlightened. But right now we're at this shift in the world, just like we're entering this age of Aquarius, where it's just the very beginning of this mass awakening, where it's an incredible phenomenon. It's everywhere around the world. People are just awakening left and right, and there has not been more awakened people on Earth than right now in the history of humankind. So, all that to say, I don't think it's a coincidence that the job that you're doing, that I'm doing, that all these people that are talking about this stuff, we're all coming together and we're creating, in a sense, a new reality for ourselves, but to show also the world in some ways of what's possible,
mm.
new potentialities, new possibilities. We're not stuck. We're not victims of the past, you know.
I really like that point. I really like the point that there's a human element to this lifetime. And especially in the spiritual spaces, there can sometimes be a disrespect to that human element because of the pursuit of some sort of transcendent experience or to maintain some transcendent experience throughout your lifetime. And I've I've studied quite a few spiritual paths, and one of the things that I found was there are some people that are meant for that path of intense like liberation. Right? Goodbye, like they're going to go off into that space.
Mhm.
And then there are other people that are not meant for that state of liberation, and instead you can think of it as like two streams. Like one direction is going towards liberation, another direction is going towards manifestation. And so there are some people that are meant for liberation, and then there are some people that are meant for manifestation. And then oftentimes people will get stuck trying to figure out like which direction they're meant to be going in. And so I definitely see that there can be people that can become and have a spiritual awakening, and then their work is actually in the world, and they need to be coming down to ground and be working with people. So that's sort of one facet of it, because you can get people that are like the monks, the mystics, and they need to be going out into the woods, or they need to be doing complete surrender and having a connection with the divine. And so there's that route. And then you have people that are like, hey, I had this spiritual awakening, and now I actually need to go and speak to people, guide people, heal people like physically, touch, just be in their energy space. So there's also that. Um, and so sometimes people will hear that and they'll say, well, I want to pursue like liberation, but I also want to do like work stuff. And the other thing that comes to mind is if we think of that as like a time period, there's often stages in someone's life. And so the work stage, typically for most people, is going to be one where they're doing earthly work in the human world with people. And that can still be spiritual work, but it's like you're still like you have the earth weight on you. You're here. And then later on in the back end of your life, you can start to prepare yourself for death, and you can go through more of these experiences that would be more considered towards the higher up or the connection with the divine or the liberated later on life. And so sometimes people will have the stages like incorrect, and they'll start to try to liberate during like their 20s and their 30s and their 40s, where like a lot of the work gets done. And then they'll notice like something's wrong or something's off. And so sometimes it's just because like it's just a sequence problem. It's like, hey, now's the time for earth work, and you're avoiding that earth work, and you're trying to say that you're liberated, but you're just avoiding the work that you're meant to be doing.
Mhm.
And so there can be that issue often, and just by changing the sequence can often help them to get the flow going properly.
Wow, I am so I can't believe you just said that. You just like read my mind, and that's exactly how I feel, honestly. I genuinely believe that there are some people who are meant to awaken, but not necessarily liberate or, find that freedom, that totality just yet. And there are some people who are meant to. But, if they're meant to, that's just going to happen. If that's their dharma, that's going to, if that's the way that's supposed to be for this lifetime, then I genuinely believe that that's going to happen. Because if you look at the people who have enlightened, who have fully liberated themselves, um, there are people who can't even do this. They can't have a Zoom call. They're functioning from a different level of consciousness. And so those
Mm,
people so it's not even like if you're here, if you're on YouTube, the likelihood of you, being enlightened is. However, awakening is a different story. This is the beginning. So it's normal that we're seeing more and more people awakening. However, you need people to be in between to show, kind of be that bridge and show other people by incorporating our humanness as much as our spirituality. And you're confirming this in ways because I had this one meditation under a tree like 2 summers ago, I believe. And yes, the tree spoke to me while I was meditating, and it was very specific in the message. And it was you're meant to have one foot, a bridge. If your legs are a bridge, one foot has to be in the earthly matter, and then the other has to be in the spirit. That's what a bridge is, so that you're creating
mm,
the connection between the two realms. And it was very clear that in order for a bridge to be solid, your feet have to be solid in both realms. And you
mm,
can't fully be there, otherwise, who can cross? And sometimes I'll get these messages, but I'll sort of I could be stubborn sometimes. I'll just do things my way anyway. And then they come in dreams, right? And then the next dream was the bridge. You know, one of those bridges that just kind of they're scheduled to come down so the cars can pass. I don't know if they have
yeah.
that in Australia. Um,
Every day.
I'm in Canada, so so far, but no, we live in the same world. But yeah, so when it was like a dream where the bridge wasn't coming down, and because it wasn't coming down, there were people, like in Titanic when the boat sank and there were just people in their
Mm,
life jackets, just like a ton of
mm,
them. And I was like, oh my God, the bridge has to come down in order for them to cross. It made sense in my dream, but
mm.
it
No, that makes sense.
that kind of confirms what you just said.
Yeah, definitely. As you were speaking, it's funny. I read a lot of biographies on different people's vocations, and I was reading one about a nun. And so the nun had basically started to pursue her path in a way that was like, hey, I'm just going to just be in God, pure isolation as much as possible, and I'm going to go and pursue that path with the divine. And then she started going down that path, and she was like, no, this isn't quite it. This isn't quite working. And then what ended up happening was that she ended up finding a more community-based role. And so she started working with people in different groups and all this kind of stuff. And the interesting thing was that both paths, right? She was still pursuing being a nun in her work and in her vocation, but they had very different expressions. Right? One was like this state of solitude, and one was like working with lots of other people. And so I think it's very dependent on that person and their own journey as to whether or not they need to be with a community or not a community, or out in front with people or behind the scenes. You get a lot of this on social media, like, hey, you've got to show your face, got to show your face. Like, for some people, yes. For some people, no. It's like it's a
Mhm.
question of self. but yeah, I do run a community because my work is in the world. And so I'm around lots of different people and helping them to, yeah, find their paths. And some of those people within that space have work that won't really be visible to anybody. And
Mhm.
even people in the community, they're very, very quiet about it. And then there are other people in the community where it's like, okay, you're going to be around a lot of people and you're going to be working with people like all the time and you're going to love that. And you're just that way inclined.
Mm.
So I definitely think like that respect for different people's paths and different expressions and ways of being is something that can go amiss within these kinds of spaces. And there can be like this kind of particular judgments as to like how to pursue the path if you're connected to particular topics.
Mhm.
And that's just not, it's not going to come externally. Like you got to figure out that stuff yourself.
Yeah. Um, I want to talk a little bit about a soul-led career. I know that this whole podcast is kind of about that, but what I feel like, and let me know if this is something that you felt and you've seen this in your the people that you work with, but it felt like you've heard about the term soul contract, I'm sure, right? It's like this contract that you have before coming into your body, right? So it's like a predetermined sort of purpose that you're given. Um, and of course, like take my words lightly. It's not so set in stone that way, but I'm just trying my best to describe what it feels like. As for me, when it felt like until this point in my life that I was just trying to align myself with my soul contract or my soul
Mm,
purpose. I believe that when you do that, although there are frictions, it's not always going to be smooth. The more you do that, the more the way is shown. I think Rumi said that, just start and then the path will be shown. It's just like this sense of I know what I'm supposed to be doing, but I'm doing something else.
there's a few things there. And by the way, I'm so glad that you are doing this and pursuing this
Thank
goal.
you.
Um, so there's like this instinctual facet of yourself that needs developing as you start to pursue a solid career. The way that I specifically would talk about it, it's like you become like a sniffer dog and you have to start to like smell your way around things. You've got to get a feeling for it, an instinct for it, and you have to figure out what that looks like for you. Might be like small like drop-ins of like knowledge and like things like, hey, you're meant to be doing this thing, and then that's a part of you that you normally neglect. Like you've got to like nurture that part of yourself. And the reason I started calling it soul-led career and sort of brought this term to the forefront was that I noticed that people had their priorities like all mixed up. And the way that I would typically describe it is to just give it like more like simplistic, easy to understand view. And it also helps me to understand it because it's like easier to understand with that simplicity. Is people will often be money led or people will be lifestyle led, but they're not soul led. And so they'll have like money and they'll be pursuing money and they'll be like, I kind of get to my soul work like later. Well, hey, this particular lifestyle that I'm living, I'll get to my soul. So they're always putting other things at the forefront. So by saying soul led, we're bringing that part to the forefront. It doesn't mean that money is important or a need for your life. It doesn't mean lifestyle isn't a need, but it's not the main thing. It's not what you're here for. It's not what your work is all about. Like the soul has to lead at the forefront. And the way that I would typically describe the soul is this is this divine part of you. It's the real part of you. It's the part of you that you're still coming into awareness. And by bringing that to the forefront and leading with that, that will naturally start to guide the way, which sort of overlaps with that quote that you mentioned with Rumi, of bringing that part of yourself to the forefront. And you'll get that more of that instinct and more be able to figure out your way through the forest. And that can be really difficult for people to bring that to the forefront, which is one of the reasons I'm like burn temptation paths, get rid of them, because what that will often do is it will reprioritize things. We'll bring that soul to the forefront and it will say like, hey, that money path that you're on, you know that's not correct. Yeah, I know that you're hearing things or like you're feeling things in your body every time you go to work, and that your body just like either wants to numb or you just get pain. You know it's not right. Get rid of it. Let's bring this to the forefront. It doesn't mean it has to happen overnight. Doesn't mean even has to happen in a year, right? It can be the slow unfolding of things, but you do have to make it the main thing, and then you've got to like pour more of your energy into it. So it
Hmm.
sounds like you are bringing that to the forefront, and that's only going to like inform you more and more of your path. And I know that when I brought it to the forefront, like it was very difficult. I kept pulling it back, and then other things will pop up like, hey, you got like bills, and hey, you got all this other stuff that's popping up. And I'm gonna put it to the forefront. And I constantly have to like tussle with that, but that's how to pursue it. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is why the human aspect is really important, right? Because the human aspect is you could either make that your enemy or you can make that your friend. And when your humanness becomes the resistance, then it's going to be harder. But once you've discovered yourself with the exercises that you teach, you get to know yourself better and you're able to navigate and you're able to cooperate with your soul. And it just kind of creates this sort of more of an effortless path, like a path of least resistance that way.
Oftentimes, when you end up going through like a period of change and you bring your soul to the forefront, is that you have to go through like this identity dissolution. Some people would call it like dissolving the ego, and you've got to like break that all down in order to like re-expand yourself. And one of the things that is super useful when you go through that process, and something that I don't really hear talked about, is that people often need to re-solidify their ego post dissolving it. And so the reason for that is because like you bring your, let's say you bring your soul to the forefront and you've reorientated yourself in the world. Then you have to protect it again and go through a period of protection. And that can be like a couple of years or something. And then after going through that period of protection, then you might be ready for like a new transformation and you might have to like break it down again and whatnot. But
Mm.
that protection period is really, really crucial, especially for people that are pursuing spiritual paths, because they're going to start bringing aspects of themselves out into the world that are foreign to them. And also, they might have to show these parts of themselves, and people in their lives are going to say things about it, or they're going to be, even just like quietly judging that you can feel, especially if you're in that space. And you're just like, I can feel that something's off with that person. I can tell that they're. So you often will need to re solidify it. And so you will need to go through a period of like hardening the like outer shell of that, and then later on, like you can you can transform and go through things again. I just felt like that was something that I wanted to bring out as we were talking.
The protection thing, that is so true. And this is like, I think like one of the most important uh, advice that you can give to somebody who's on this path is you really have to protect this path that you're on, this vocation that you found, because it is so easy, especially because it's a lonely one. It could be lonely if you don't have a community, but even if you do have one, this is like a self journey. You're on your own. You could sure maybe have a team or whatever, but there's this part that you're the one walking this road alone. And alone doesn't necessarily have to be lonely, but it can be. And with loneliness, sometimes with maybe solitude is the better word, uh, because you're alone, you could have a lot of like doubts that creep into your mind. But you know at the bottom of your soul that this is what you're supposed to do. And so that protection thing, my God, I cannot stress enough on the protection.
Mm,
Protect your path, people. Protect your vocation. This is what you're meant to do. Who cares whether people think? They'll catch on. Just show them with action or don't. Doesn't really matter.
mm.
But yeah, stay true to your path and protect it at all costs, especially at those beginning stages. Those are so rocky.
Interesting as well is that obviously you can go through a period of having to solidify everything and make sure that nobody can come in and basically tear you back down into a state of being that you were previously prior to being aware of this. But also you start to become this pioneer and to start to seeing it as being a pioneer and as a leader and just being misunderstood for a period. And then other people will slowly start to catch on, which happens. And the longer that you're on your path for, other people start to notice and they like, hey, how did you do that? How did you figure that out? But in the beginning, some people can be very judgy. I mean, some people can be very uh, open and supportive, and even though there's like not a understanding there, but yeah, this is more so for people that have those types of relationships or have those sort of social circles, or even just are worried about that sort of stuff, whereby they
Mhm.
might be disregarded to make sure that you do solidify back down and protect.
But I think in this new reality that we're going to see people who are genuinely leaders. And what that really means is for me, is people who want to genuinely help and support other people. And it's about collaboration. It's not about superficial goals like I mean they could be incorporated, you know, like financial goals, sure, but that's not like the main thing. There's like a deeper purpose, and that shows that emanates from a leader, and you could feel that in a leader, in a true leader. And so
Mm,
yeah, thank you for the work that you're doing.
you're welcome. You're welcome. And I agree. I agree. I see that trending that way as well. I think that there are definitely so one way I think about it is from through like an astrological context, and you obviously you've got the benefic planets, which are the good guy planets, Jupiter and Venus. Then you can have some malefic planets or the bad guy planets, and Mars and Saturn. And oftentimes Mars will be trying to dominate or sever, like sever, cut
Mm,
off, split things. It's like a contest or a
mm,
fighting off. um, Compared to more of like a Jupiter quality where it's like, hey, let's bring everything together. Let's all come together. Let's all find our spots and find our places amongst each other. So where sort of the at least the spiritual path, the way that I've been observing them and moving towards is everyone's trying to like find their space. And there is so much room for other people to connect and say, like, hey, you're doing this cool thing over here, I'm doing this cool thing. Like, let's pass knowledge, let's like share it all around, as opposed to what can also happen, unfortunately, in the spiritual space, which is like, I am the spiritual person and I am the leader and I know all the things.
mhm.
And whilst that's still there and that's just human nature and that's always going to be around, there's definitely this developing of more people that want to share and transfer the knowledge and transfer the wisdom, and so that we can all move move upwards. And so that
Yeah.
to me is very, very exciting. I'm like, that's super cool. That's why I like to help people on their callings. I'm like, oh, you're doing something that I could never do, and that's super useful in the world, and that's amazing. Go do that thing.
Mhm.
We need it. We need
Yeah.
it, and just more and more of that is yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah, and I love that you said that, you know, sometimes it's within the spiritual community that you'll see some divide. So it doesn't mean that because you're spiritual that you're perfect, or, you know, there's this, again, know thyself. Do some digging, do some shadow work. There's going to be some work to do. We all have some work to do. It's a continuous like journey within yourself on the human
Mm,
level, and then it could get on the spiritual level as well. Um, I yes, the thing that we were kind of avoiding to talk, but now we're going to talk about it. The multi-passionate people. Yeah, so what is that, and how can people navigate through that and find sort of a vocation by not narrowing it down, but by, I guess, assembling everything together, or um, how would you do that?
mm. Yeah, that's a really, really big question in terms of multi-passionate people. People that are just have multiple different passions. They have multiple different interests, they have multiple different curiosities, they get pulled in different directions, and they just say, for example, one day they really enjoy knitting, maybe they go for a period of enjoying knitting, and then suddenly they get super into wanting to read all about Dion Fortune, a cult philosopher, and they're just like wanting to read all of her books. And then they'll suddenly get sparked up by something else, or maybe they're doing both at the same time. So really, it's just people that are interested in many different things. And one of the problems that these people often face, and I put myself in this group of people as well, is that you're often told that hey, you got to focus in on one thing, and you focus in on that one thing, you go hard on that one thing, you specialize in that one thing, and then that's the way that you can support yourself, support your family. You can do really well in your career path. You can get accolades for this and high achievement. But the narrative is at some point you've got to just choose one thing, go all in on that, and anything else, it's like you might be able to touch that on the weekends, maybe for an hour or two, and sort of don't try to bring that into your work or only ruin it. And I just think that that's fundamentally wrong. I think that there are many people that do have that path and they are that way inclined and they are the person that should be going like fully into that one thing and just developing. And that exists. However, there are so many different people that that doesn't work for, and it actually impacts their work in a negative way by trying to do that because they're not just allowing themselves to develop in the way that they're meant to develop. And so they're contorting themselves into a shape that isn't theirs. So the way that I will often talk about it in terms of how it works with vocations is oftentimes there are different interests that can be woven into the fabric of your path. And not only does that help to improve the path, but there's like these interconnections of these different interests that will often bring in insightful, creative ideas that weren't stumbled on without this sort of knowledge or experience. And by bringing these more into your path, not only do you get more connected to your path, but it also ends up helping whatever your pursuit is meant to be. Now, there are many different sort of famous examples of people that do this, such as I think of like Childish Gambino, who's like on the stage as a comedian, he's acting, he's in music. Or we go throwback to the Renaissance, we've got Leonardo da Vinci. So we have many different figures out in the world. They are hyper curious and they want to bring these different facets into their path. But for some reason, in our culture, we sort of look down upon it. We see this as something not to pursue. I would sort of point around the Industrial Revolution, like Adam Smith saying that, hey, we've got to specialize. And, he did make the point that people specializing is going to create unhappy humans, but it's great for industry. And so he did say that. But in terms of our
You warned
experience,
us.
as yeah, he did warn us. But yeah, it sort of just happened, and we sort of accepted it. And I'm seeing more and more people that are starting to push away from it, especially with these introductions in the social media sphere, where they're like, "Hey, you can have content pillars." It's an attempt to try to bring in more than one facet of a person into their public expression and their public visibility. I think that I'm not going to talk on how what I think about that sort of structure, but I think there's better ways, there's better approaches, and we're really at the beginning of a new renaissance. That might sound a little bit tacky, but a new period of time whereby more of people's passions can be infused into their path.
Yeah, I agree. I really think the we're starting to break out of this industrial revolution phase that has such an impact on society. And I think it was maybe needed for the time. I could see how it was useful for the time, but I feel like we've now surpassed the need for that. And that's why we're starting to see a lot of people walking away from this old paradigm, this old way of working and being and living. And I think we're seeing it more and more with the newer generations as well. Like if you look at the Gen Z, it's a different breed of people. These guys
Mm,
they are just, they know, they're like not settling for what they don't want. And of course, there's some pros and cons to that, but in the corporate world, you hear stories all the time, like they miss meetings, they just don't care. But
mm,
I think that, of course, from an older generation's perspective, that could seem like just being disobedient or disrespectful. But from their perspective, they're just they're just a new generation, and there's going to be a new way of thinking and a new way of doing things. And maybe they're just realizing that this isn't it for me and this isn't the way that I'm going to go. And so with a new generation, I think is going to come just a new way of new possibilities altogether, and which is going to create a new reality, essentially.
One of the challenges that I've found with Gen Z, and they went through this experience of having to, get locked down. And obviously, everybody went through that. They went through it, and I think what I think was like a really critical time in their development. And there was a lot of things that were popping off socially out in the world as they were going through that period. And one of the things that I've noticed in working with people that are from this generation is that they're very aware of the world, the environment, politics, what's going on externally, but they're very unaware of themselves.
Mm.
There's this real intense orientation on the external. And if we're looking at it compared to like the millennials, they're more aware about outside culture and what's going on than us in general. But in terms of their own self-understanding, they're very unaware of that. So I think one of their big challenges is coming back to themselves and having to develop themselves and really tuning in with who they are and how they want to live, and going deep on that. And so I'm interested to see how that evolves over the next couple of years. But I think that their disgruntlement within the workplace is just one facet. Like they don't quite know why they're disgruntled. And maybe they're like, hey, if I left this and became a content creator, then I'd be good. Then I'd be and I had more free time. It's like, No, not really. You can
Yeah.
tune in to yourself. You actually have to know what you are meant for and what you're called for. So I think that is like an ongoing thing that's developing. And so yeah, I think we're going to see that over the next couple of years.
I mean, that's just Gen Z. Wait till we see Gen A.
I was thinking about what's going to happen with not only Gen A, but the future generations. And I think that one of the things that is in relation to careers and vocations that pops up is this idea of salary and how much longer humans are going to be working in the workplace with like salaries, and are people even going to have jobs in the future? And what does that even look like? So a lot of people are sort of citing this as some sort of utopia. And in many ways, I think that it will be. It will have so many great elements where people start to actually disengage from the workplace and start to pursue other things, maybe creative pursuits, whatever it is. But there is this element of humans needing not to do work, but to pursue some form of development, some form, we can call it developing their soul.
Mm.
And so that's always going to be there. And so interestingly, I think that even if money disappears and there's some sort of like universal basic income that's spread out throughout the world, the need for a vocation and a calling and your own spiritual progress and your own development of your family, these are just going to be new problems that just come more to the forefront, and people are going to have to look at, and that's what's going to take up the majority of their time. And so I think with this younger generation, it's going to be interesting to watch how that works, because then they're going to start to pursue things potentially, whether it's the Gen A or a younger generation, outside of just things that we just take so for granted. And we're so used to seeing like a 9 to 5 workplace. It's just might just be on the disappear.
Yeah. This is another quote that I really liked of yours. And this is all from your Instagram as well. Um, Creatives won't need to apply for jobs when they can create their own. Maybe one last thing before I let you go. Um, you mentioned psychedelics earlier. Is psychedelics something that could help others in finding their soul career or their career archetype? If the intention is there, is this something that you, not to put you in the hot seat, but is it something that you could see helping other people? And what is like your general thought on psychedelics?
I think it's a great thing that it's getting so popular in terms of helping people with their careers. Like yes and no. So the reason I say I'll start with like the no first is because oftentimes I'll work with people who have done all the things. And what I mean by that is they've gone and worked with shamans, they've taken the drinks, they've taken the mushrooms, they've tried all these different, for use of a better word, elixirs. And they might have done like lots of traveling as well. That's another thing that a lot of, especially spiritual seekers, they might go to a country, like India or Bali, and they'll want to go and experience something that will inform them on their path. And I've just had so many people that have tried that and come to me post doing that and said, like, I still don't know, or I'm still confused. I remember I worked with one guy, and he said that he just spent, it was like 90 days in a silent retreat with the intention of understanding his career path. And he just left and felt like really connected to himself, really connected. Like, so it's not like bad or it had like negative effects, but he wanted to know what his thing was, like what his career path was. And he left that being developing more of himself, but he didn't come out with a clear answer. And so when I ended up working with him, I ended up just resurfacing in a material. And then he was like, oh, I'm really into photography and I just forgotten that piece of myself. And so he didn't need to go and have one of these spiritual experiences to find that out for himself. Instead,
Mm.
there was a different approach whereby he could do that. So in my experience, a lot of people will go out and try all these different um, experiences, and then it doesn't give them the answer. And that's might be like a bias because of the kind of work I do. And so it's the people that have fun, like why would the person who has found the answer come and see me afterwards? Like they've already found the answer, they're moving on. So
Mm.
there is that like bias there. So I don't have the information from those people. In saying that, I have also worked with some people who have gone through what I call this unearthing process, where you unearth your very own career archetype, which gives you the sense of conviction as to which direction to go in. Who have during the process gone and done mushrooms, ayahuasca, and it seemed like it was a really important part of that process for them. And by doing that, it didn't necessarily give like the name or the answer, but they knew that they were heading in a direction that was correct. So it was just sometimes it's often described as like a feeling or a body sensation. And that has definitely happened. We had someone in the space recently, her career archetype was a La Bruja, which is Spanish for witch, but it has roots
Oh, yes.
in the Spanish heritage. And she had to go through an ayahuasca experience in order to connect with that facet. And that was just for her. Like, not everybody does that within our space, but it was really important. Like, I could see when I spoke to her, I was like, this is really important for your unearthing process. And so there's like a nuanced answer here. It's like kind of sometimes for certain people, yes. But lots of people that I've seen didn't work. And the answer was actually more direct. And by going out there, they were actually moving away from confronting the things that they needed to confront.
Mm. I love that answer because that I have to say that plant medicine isn't a way to bypass anything. It's not a way to bypass unearthing your career archetype. It's not a way to bypass the hard work that needs to be in place in order for you to get on that path. And for me personally, it was a confirmation, and it was a very loud confirmation. And it gave me one answer for 2 nights, and it was, you need to get the hell out of that job. And it showed me,
Mm,
I knew that I needed to get out, but I was hoping for more, but they just stayed on that one subject and they showed me how it was affecting me and how it was so much worse than I thought it was,
mm,
the effects that it was having
mm,
on me. So it was almost like, forget about what you need to do. This is the urgent step that needs to be done. You need to get out ASAP. And she showed me mercilessly why I needed to get out. And it was more of
mm,
a feeling and visions, and you feel everything, right, when you're on that kind of substance. And it was uh, it was extremely graphic and it was extremely potent, to say the least.
mm,
And so the message was clear. But then afterwards, I was the one who had to figure out all the other steps. It didn't say,
mm,
oh, go start a YouTube channel and oh, go start and write that book and create this e-course or whatever. It didn't show me any of that. It just showed me
mm,
you need to get out of that one job that you're in. That is just not doing you any favor. And then the
mm,
rest was for me to uncover. And so, yeah, I could really resonate with your answer there. Yes and no. It showed me
mm,
that that wasn't it. It was more of a process of elimination. That's not it. But no, you got to
yeah.
go figure it out for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that's super instructive. It's super instructive because then it does give you a clear answer in a way. So it's like, no,
Yeah, it
not
was
anymore,
very
leave.
clear. Yeah.
But I'm not going to tell you how.
Exactly. That's for you to figure out. Um, Joel, before I let you go, I want to know if you have anything you would like to say to your community and to mine, the spiritual community, or anybody who's just looking for a new career, to change careers to one that is more fulfilling, one that could bring them joy, and that is possible. Do you have anything that you would like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it just then. Like, it is possible, and anybody that's telling you it's not possible, probably isn't walking their path, and that's where that's coming from. They've probably sacrificed certain pieces of themselves for something that is, like I mentioned earlier, money led, lifestyle led, and maybe even at one time they tried and they're just passing on stuff that didn't work for them or their potential pain. But it is absolutely possible. It's not easy, so don't. That's also quite true. It's not easy to find your path, and it's also not quite easy to walk your path. But it's absolutely possible, and you can get the support that you need. Whether that's with me, whether it's with other people, there are people in the world that are able to support you through that process. And so knowing that, I think, can give everybody that's wanting to change hope. But the process is self-knowledge and gathering that self-knowledge and becoming aware of that self-knowledge. And so if I had any recommendation to anybody that's trying to figure out what their path is, it's you need to go and gather self-knowledge.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And anybody who's watching, I really recommend this course. If you're feeling lost, if you're having doubts about your path, or if you just want to altogether switch paths, this is a course that could literally change your life. And I wouldn't have Joel on if I didn't believe in this. I have done it. I am doing it in the process of it, and I can already see the impact that it has on me and my own career. So, Joel, thank you so much for being here and for doing what you do. I know that there are so many people who could benefit from your course and your knowledge and your expertise. So, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to watch your path unfold. Just at the beginning.
Just the beginning.